Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show this evening. The next guest, we have a spinoff from last week. We're going to have two parts. So this is the second part of the Imam Abdul Raoof
Nasir
on the show tonight. Yeah. And we're going to bring him on the show and allow him to continue from last week and give you some more science of Islam in the prison system. Mm-hmm. So welcome to the show, my brother.
Thank you.
Glad
to be here again.
We had you on last week, and it was so good. We had to bring you back this week. So continue as you were last week.
Okay, we left last week speaking about how we believe Islam began to appear in the California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation, as they call it today.
Right.
CDCR, its initials are. And we mentioned where the influence of Elijah Muhammad going to prison in 1942, and along with maybe almost 100 of his male members of the nation. And then 1946, Malcolm going, and actually he's probably the most well-known convert to Islam in the penal system. Yes. And then Imam W.D. Muhammad, or Wallace Muhammad at that time, the son of Elijah Muhammad, who became the leader after Elijah Muhammad died in 1975. In 1975, in the California Department of Corrections, the Muslim became recognized as an approved religion in 1970, even though there had been Muslims in the 60s, and they fought, and they petitioned, and they sued in order to be recognized. And finally, in 1970, they were recognized. The numbers and recognized meant that they could gather legitimately, and they could use the prison facilities. Before that time, when they gathered, the police could always, because they had a rule at that time, if five people can't congregate at one time.
Right.
Yeah. So they would always break up their meetings. They would send them to the adjustment center, would send them to the hole, but they persisted. And so after being recognized, now you can have use of the chapel or places where other groups worship on a rotating basis.
Right. And
then also, their representatives could come in from the street without going through another race, another religious group, a leader. We used to have to go through the chaplains that were Christian or Protestant, and even they had Jewish chaplains at that time. So it opened up a whole new thing. Still, in 1975, most of the members in prisons were members of the Nation of Islam. When W.D. Muhammad became the leader in 1975, his vision was to reform the Nation of Islam, to bring it closer to what was required by the sources of Islam, which were the Quran and the tradition or the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, to whom the Quran was revealed 1,400 years ago. Right. Muhammad of Arabia. So this is the standard for Muslims all over the world. So his vision was to bring Islam in prison and on the street. Because on the street in 1975, the biggest Muslim organization was the Nation of Islam.
Right.
All the other groups, there were some Sunni groups, very, very few, mostly on the East Coast, and they were relatively small. The Nation of Islam had, in 1975, when Elijah Muhammad died, there were almost 100 temples, mosques that were associated with that movement. Some say there were 500,000 or 1 million followers. Some say even more than that. But like most religions, you had more people who were followers than there were who attended every week.
Right.
You know, for every person who attended every week, there might be 5 or 6 more followers who were, they attended sparingly or only on the special days or whatever, or who identified with the movement but didn't necessarily want regular attendees.
Right.
So some people said the Nation of Islam had 1 million followers in all these numbers. In the prison, same way. For every guy who was a Muslim in prison, say for instance today they said about 10 to 15,000 Muslims. There are 2 or 3 guys on the yard who used to function, right? And then maybe two more who are sympathizers, strong sympathizers, who believe in the teachings but feel themselves not ready for whatever reason, or they got other affiliations and they don't want to mix affiliations. So at that time, the whole community on the street and in prison began to go through what we call the transition. And the transition was a step-by-step retreat, or not a retreat, but a revision. Imam Muhammad said it this way. He said, whatever agrees with the Quran and the Sunnah, he was going to keep. In the teachings of Honorable Elijah Muhammad were controversial because he said he had some language in there that the Muslims in general felt were un-Islamic. He called himself the Messenger of Allah. He said that Allah came in the person of Fard Muhammad, who was his teacher. And there's some things to say about that philosophically, but the way people interpreted it in the bigger Islamic world was these were un-Islamic teachings. And so Imam Muhammad, when he came in, he said he was going to remove anything that didn't agree with the Quran and the Sunnah. But he wasn't going to do it all at once. He did it in a step-by-step basis. Just like Prophet Muhammad, when he came, he didn't give the whole religion. In fact, even more so, Allah didn't reveal the whole Quran to him at one time, stage by stage. And so Imam Muhammad had a strategy to bring Islam to the former members of the Nation of Islam like that on the street. And so that same knowledge had to be done inside the prison. And so it was done through these volunteers who used to go in. Okay. And then later on, as the prison system began to see that the Muslims were changing in their direction, in their philosophy, because the Nation of Islam had a philosophy that was perceived as race philosophy, because it was based on race, on the race of the person. We wouldn't let white people in our meetings. They couldn't come in. Even if they owned the building, they couldn't come in. We sent them their money, but they couldn't come in. Right. So it was, so that was the dividing line, race. And so as the teachings were brought in line with Quran and the way of Muhammad, it's not based on race. So that same thing had to happen inside the prison. And as you know, things don't happen in prison. changes not made in prison except blood. A little blood is shed most of the time.
That's right.
But amazingly now, I won't say no blood was shed, but very little blood was shed. It was almost like a bloodless revolution. And it was done that way because of not so much the followers outside, the followers inside. They had such belief, and they accepted the strategy. And they began to use the strategy inside to help reform the brothers inside in the teachings and learn the new things that we had to learn. We had to learn how to do anything that was Islamic that we didn't know before. And many of the things that we did before were Islamic, like loving ourselves was Islamic, you know. Having collective economics is Islamic. Doing for self is Islamic. Respecting the authority is Islamic, you know. Because we had this was a principle actually in the Nation of Islam, respecting authority. So we kept that. I used to have a card when I was in the Nation, and the card said, this is Elijah Muhammad's teaching, said, if this person is found breaking the law, take the card, send the card back to 4746 South Woodline Avenue, and arrest the said bearer.
Is that right?
Yes, that's what the card said.
So you get a card to the individual to take back?
No, the card was given us like an identification card. And if Elijah Muhammad told us to obey the law, except if it conflicted with our religion.
Okay.
That was the dividing line. So if the person was found committing a crime, our religion wasn't committing crimes.
Right. Exactly.
So we had this card to let the public know, or the police, or whoever caught us committing the crime, to know this person's acting outside. Send him back, get him to jail, send the card back to us. So respect for what I'm saying, respect for a certain authority that didn't conflict with our religious belief was in our teachings then. So we kept that. So only the things that were un-Islamic or felt to be un-Islamic, like calling yourself the Messenger of Allah. Elijah. The new leader didn't call himself that. He could have called himself God. We would have accepted it because we were people who follow leadership. But he called himself the chief minister. And then later on, he used an Islamic term. He called himself the Mujaddid. And Mujaddid, for those who don't know, it means one who comes to renew the religion. Because in the tradition of Islam, the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him, or Prophet Muhammad, to whom the Quran was revealed, he said that in this religion, every 100 years, Allah would send a mujaddid to help to put the religion back in better shape than it had felt. If it falls out of shape, everyone. So these predictions were already in Islamic theology and Islamic teachings. And so Imam Muhammad, he used that term to refer to himself. Even before, he said he was a mujaddid, and let the people know that that's what we're working on right now, today, might change because it's going to be renewed.
Right.
And so he set the stage for this evolution and this transition that was going on outside and even inside the prison, and the believers, people who believed in the religion, who kept the belief, they followed this pattern also. And so it was brothers inside the prison who had to institute this, and so there was less. It was less bloodshed, as we say, because they were doing this step by step.
Right.
And of course, it had to be prioritized. You couldn't change everything at once. Change the most important, clarify the most important things.
Right.
And so immediately he clarified who God was.
Right.
And who the messenger was.
Right.
So, and then later, of course, all those other things start coming in. And sometimes a few people didn't accept it, who believed in the old way. When we start letting everybody into the mosque, whereas before we only let blacks in the mosque, some people felt that was they felt threatened by that. And so they left and they did something else, or they went back and to their old ways of belief or what have you. So we lost people, but we also gained people. We gained the people who was always telling us, man, I would join you, man, but I don't know about that race stuff. Talking about, I don't know, you're talking about the black man is God. You know? So some people had trouble with that anyway.
Right, yes.
And many of us had trouble with it, to tell the honest truth.
Yes.
But because the good things we knew that were in the nation, some of us came in as from these dire situations, and Islam helped us. Like Malcolm, he was a criminal, he was a thug, he was a heroin. I mean, he was a drug addict and all this.
Right. That's right.
You know, and Islam helped for him. So the social reform aspect that was in the Nation of Islam was what attracted many people.
Sure.
In the other mystical teachings, we bought it just because because we knew the social reform stuff was solid. We know that's true, and that touched our heart.
It's powerful.
So at any rate, so in 1975, Imam Muhammad visited. In 1977, he came himself and visited San Quentin. And I think it was in November 1977, if I have it in my notes. He gave like a policy statement. He spoke for, and there's some brothers here who were there at the time. Imam Al-Amin, Abu Qadr Al-Amin, he was there at the time because he was on death row. And prior to that, he had been on death row. And when they outlawed the death penalty in 1971, I think it was, and then they commuted their sentence to life with the possibility of parole, and then I think he did another 9 years after that.
Yeah, he wound up getting parole.
And he ended up winning parole. But at this time, he was in San Quentin when Imam Muhammad came and visited, along with some ministers, as we call them at that time. They weren't called imams quite yet. I think the next year is when we switched the terminology. They came and visited, and award all the prison officials there, and they listened to the teaching how this man was presenting the religion, and they felt like it was something that they could that would fit better in this kind of environment. Even though they appreciated, actually they said one administrator said in San Quentin at the time there were 2,400 inmates, and they said 10% of them came to Jummah prayer on a regular basis. So that's 200 and something inmates. If this person's his projection was correct. So, and that's about, we get a little bit more than that now today. Most prisons, you get about 10% of 15% of the inmates are frequent Jummah on some kind of basis. So they had a good reputation, but reputation became better. And so the prison allowed now to the Nation of Islam, or this movement that actually the first year Imam Muhammad changed the name of the Nation of Islam. He changed it to the World Community of Islam in the West. So he took this Nation of Islam language away, and he began to slowly change the titles of the leaders from minister, and in a couple of years he changed it to imams, which is the Islamic terminology. So this evolution went on over. And really, tell the honest truth, it's still going on.
Still going on.
Because, Islam is too big to say we know it all.
Sure is.
Yeah,
Sure
right.
is. Yeah.
So in 1970, after Imam came to San Quentin, 1977, 1978, they hired the first Muslim chaplain in Northern California.
Okay. Okay.
And he was the brother who used to be the minister on the street in Oakland. He was my minister, John BX, and he became John Fakir. He was the first Muslim chaplain. And so now you got a man on the scene there, bringing these teachings from almost directly from Imam Muhammad to the brothers of San Quentin.
Yeah.
And Imam, if you knew Imam Fakir, he was a strong man.
Yes.
Which most of these men had to be strong to work in this environment. He was the strongest of the strongest.
Yes, he was. Yes.
And so he, like I said, there were only 9 or 10 prisons, in 77, maybe it was 11. They start, adding a few prisons in the 70s. But he stayed there for about 5 years. And I used to come in and do help with Islamic studies and language classes for the inmates. And so slowly they began to learn what we were learning on the street. And they began to teach to each other, in that fashion. Each one teach one.
Right, right.
And of course they had strong leadership there because, in prisons generally, leadership is respected. Right, because there's not going to be some problems.
Right, yeah, definitely.
Right.
Definitely.
So slowly over the many years, then Islam began to change from predominantly Native Islam to people who follow the Quran and the Sunnah. We don't actually call ourselves Sunnis. This is a terminology that people put on us because of the definition. We are distinct from those who say they're Shia, although we accept all of them as Muslims. But the Shia have some distinct beliefs that we didn't have, which is, and it's over not the fundamental principles of religion. We all accept the same fundamental. It's over historical events that happened after the death of Muhammad of 1400 years ago.
Right.
And so they have a particular outlook on that all Muslims don't share. That's what makes them Shia, that particular outlook. And it's a debated issue. But for the fundamental principles, we all accept and have the same beliefs to that degree. And so Sunni Islam, if you want to call it that, began to be the form of Islam that was prevalent in the prison system up until the end of 1970s, when the Iranian Revolution happened. Imam Khomeini, may Allah forgive him his sin, have mercy on him, he came back to Iran, and Iran became the only country in the world that had a Sunni, had a Shia majority. One of the first things they did that was very beautiful, actually, there was a hostage situation that took place there. And among those who were held hostage were some African Americans. They released the African Americans because they had some understanding of our historical situation here in America with slavery and discrimination and all this over the many years. And so it was like a recognition of, so that was the first thing they did. And then the other thing they did when they got somewhat settled in government, they began to print literature and they began to send it around the world, especially to the prison systems. And so in the 80s, Islamic literature that was Shia philosophy was appearing in the prison. And some people began to accept it.
Sure did.
And so then you begin to see some. It never really was a large population, but there is a population of Shia in the prison, and actually, in most cases, the relationship between the Sunnis and the Shia in the prison are much more peaceful than the relationship in Iraq or in Syria or in these or in Yemen. They fight wars, and they fought a war at that time in the 80s between the so-called Sunni Saddam Hussein. He attacked Iran, so on and so forth. So there is a population of Shia in the prison system. So not only was Islam spread, the Quran and Sunnah was opened up for the prisoners the inmates who identified Islam in prison. Now when you go to prison, 95% of the prisoners follow some form of Quran and Sunnah.
Yes. Yes.
Rather than following the teachings of the Nation of Islam. Mm-hmm. And the members of the Nation of Islam are very, very, maybe, when I left the prison, we had about 400 Muslims, and maybe 20 were people who said they were committed to the Nation of Islam teachings. You know, so that's kind of the proportion of what it was. I left the prison in 2014 to go back to school to do a postgraduate degree.
Okay.
And then, you know, before I got hired in the prison system, I was a volunteer during the Nation of Islam days. And then after a while, I started working in the juvenile halls and youth authorities because we wanted to try to get the guys younger.
Right.
Rather than get them when they got to prison. Let's get them when they're on the road, because that juvenile hall, that's the introduction to prison, is in the youth authorities.
Exactly.
And then, juvenile halls, and then the youth authorities. Right. You on your way. That's the pipeline. The prison is there.
You're on your way. Yeah.
And then with this increase, because of this movement they call mass incarceration, that we were feeling, but we didn't know how detrimental it was going to be.
Right. Right.
It started in the 70s and in the 80s for sure.
Yeah.
It was some of our fault too, because we was selling narcotics, and we formed these organizations where we was warring against each other on the street and all that. So it wasn't like it was all somebody else's fault now. But we played into the hands of those who had a scheme.
We definitely did.
Right.
We definitely did.
Yeah.
So we played a big part of it. Yeah. But we, like I said, we've come a long ways. You know, in CDCR.
Yes.
CDCR has made a complete change as far as religion.
Absolutely.
And we play a big part of the people coming home from prison, going into the system, become Muslim in the system,
right.
and come home. So we have a large following from the CDCR back to the communities coming home.
Absolutely.
So religion is a big thing in most of our communities now. You know, Islam.
No doubt.
You know, so yeah, and we come home in large numbers doing things.
No doubt about that.
Come on, doing things. We're making it seem in our communities that we didn't go. We went into the system one way. Right. But we come out transformed.
Absolutely.
Transformed. So inshallah, that's a big thing going on right now.
Actually, and I think I can say this probably most of the places, because I know some. You know, I'm in contact with some of the chaplains. Most of the chaplains actually I'm in contact over time. But it was the Muslims. So at one time, in fact, especially for life sentence, guys who had life sentences, during the time of, I think it was Gray Davis. Was it Gray Davis? You probably know better than I do, because he said, whatever it was, he said, if you got a life sentence and you kill somebody, you ain't getting out of prison.
That's right. You come home in a pine box.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Matter of fact, it was Gray Davis and Pete Wilson. They followed suit. They followed suit. They said the only way that you a life is coming home is in a pine box with a tag on the store.
And this was particularly ominous, because these were the guys who had the last say-so whether you get out or not. Even if the board of prison terms said you can come home,
that's right.
They had veto power.
Last word.
And they used that veto power, and they were rejecting 99% of the people who got found suitable.
That's a fact.
And the only reason why the 1% got found suitable, because they knew it was illegal for them to do that.
Exactly.
Because the guys were not sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. That's another sentence.
Right.
But they were saying you got no possibility of parole.
But they made it the point that some went home and they brought them back.
Yeah.
Yeah, some went home and they brought them back anyway.
Yeah.
You know. So
and they let a few women out.
Yes.
Who probably shouldn't have been in prison in the first place, because they killed their husbands or boyfriends or what have you during the time before this spousal abuse became known as a big factor.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so some of these women were let out, and so you're able to say, well, we did live somebody out, you know.
Yeah, right.
But it was at our prison, and when I say our prison, Solano, it were the Muslims who were on the forefront of those getting out of prison first, the lifers. And not only did they figure out or began to organize themselves to to teach how to go to the board, how to put your package together, how to put your presentation to the board together, what to do, how to do these self-help classes.
Right.
They start forming self-help classes in the buildings and what have you.
That's right. Sure
This
did.
is at Solano
Right.
to the extent, and then guys start getting out who are Muslims, and the other guys began to come to the Muslims to say,
How this going on? How you
yeah,
doing
right. And we began to teach classes
That's right. That's right.
informally in the buildings and on the yards
That's
first.
Right. Sure did. Sure did.
And then over time, the prison actually started adopting some of these programs and started letting
Get the program in the system. Sure
in
did.
the system.
That sure did.
In fact, the brother just got out, I mentioned to you, they have a program they call it Man Up. So he probably is going to talk about that.
Okay. Okay.
One of the brothers, a group of brothers formed that at Solano. And they allowed them to go from yard to yard taking that. They got so impressed by what they had put together. And it really is Islam, but they didn't use the Islamic language. They used the Islamic strategy.
Right.
And they used a language that was more palatable to even non-Muslim, whoever, whatever your race, whatever your religion, didn't make a difference.
Right.
But the principles underneath these brothers are Muslims.
Right. Exactly.
That has been a hallmark at the prison here at Solano.
Solano. Right.
And probably other prisons, I'm sure.
Right.
Stuff that happened in one prison goes around. I'm sure the other brothers at other prisons.
If it's successful, they'll
Absolutely.
They'll send it around to other prisons. Yes.
So brothers were not only successful on the street now, coming back, and I listened to your show several times and wonderful reports on what brothers are doing. So many brothers doing so many things.
So many, yes.
And so many different avenues. Another thing I think the audience should know, which you might have said before, that lifers, guys who were sentenced to life, who had life sentences, they don't come back to prison.
No.
Their recidivism rate is like something like 4 or 5%. Otherwise, 95% of them get out, they never come back.
Well, it's been documented. We have less than 1%. Go back in the system. Less than 1%.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we don't know. We don't go back. Once
so
we
that's
get out,
99% success rate,
Exactly.
whereas the incarcerated persons who don't have a life sentence,
Right.
their recidivism rate of these rates is 50%, 60%.
Exactly.
Otherwise, they go back to prison
Exactly.
within the first 3 months.
Exactly. They go back.
Sometimes only a technical violation, but they go back to
They
prison.
go back
Yeah.
for some
and
reason.
then some do another crime, actually do another crime.
Exactly. For some reason. So this religion works.
Absolutely.
religion
It works, right. It works inside
and outside.
and outside.
outside. So we invite anybody to this religion because it's something a religion that does work. But we want to thank you, my brother, for coming into our show today.
Sorry, my phone.
We appreciate the signs that you've given today. You said some things that I had no idea. I didn't know existed. So alhamdulillah for coming into the program,
Yes, sir.
showing the people in the homes and the bedrooms and the living rooms, that we have a religion there that works.
Absolutely.
We invite you to come into this religion. We don't discriminate. We don't care what size you weigh, how big your hat size is, or what color you are, where you come from. We have no problem with that. We want you to come in and just look at it. A lot of people in prison. I did 27 years and 9 months in prison. And a lot of people in prison say, "Well, hey, homie, come on, take shahada." No, I don't say that. I say, look at the religion, see what you're going to accept, and then if you accept it, take the religion.
Right.
Don't come in don't take shahada because I took shahada.
Right.
Don't do it on those bases. Do it on something that you say, "Oh, okay, I can live with this. I can be part of this." Right? And then take your shahada. Don't die without this.
Right.
Don't leave here without
Absolutely.
this. This is something that you need to leave them with because, see, when you leave here, you got somewhere else you got to go.
Absolutely.
You can go to the hellfire, or you go to paradise. One of the two. So you can go to paradise being a believer, or you go to hellfire being not a believer. It's up to you. So the choice is yours, and my plea is to you is check it out. During 9/11, they said a lot of people became Muslim. Because they was curious about what happened. What's this? They went, all the bookstores was empty. They had no Qurans, right? They went and bought Qurans out the bookstore. So my plea is to you that check it out. Don't take my word for it. Don't listen to what hypocrites say because they're gonna tell you something against it. They tell you to read one book. They don't tell you to read all books. You say read one book and we don't want you to read nothing else. Why? It's a problem with that. I have a problem with that. Why do you want me to read one book? They say from cradle to the grave, read. Right? Read anything that you can get your hand on, read, because you want to understand it on this, where you are. You know, you're in a society of madness. You know, how do people get mad? How do people go crazy? How do they lose their mind? You see, we want to understand, you know, why somebody read a book and go crazy. My father told me to say, listen to a crazy man, because a crazy man can tell you how you become crazy. Right? So understand what people say and what they do, why they do it. Read the books. You know, we say read all books. We don't just say one book. Read all the books. Get all the knowledge you can get. Get educated from the cradle to the grave. Get everything. So my plea is to you, read it. You know, don't just read that book. Read this book and find out what the books say. You know, if you don't know how to read, have somebody read it to you. And then if you don't know how to read, learn how to read, right? Learn Arabic. Learn the natural language of the book, and get the full understanding of the book. You know, don't take my word for it, because I'm gonna say something to you, then you're gonna go back and get your own interpretation of it. So don't take my word for it. So read the book, get understanding, and we thank this brother for coming on today, brother. I mean, I appreciate you. I appreciate you what you've done today, because you gave me some great insight on my religion, and I've been in this religion for a long time. Right. So you gave me some great insight on my religion, and we thank you. We thank you. So we're gonna bring you back in some months. Right. Yeah. You know, we're gonna bring the brother back on the show, hopefully next week. Okay. We're gonna bring him on the show and allow him to come in. He just did how many years did he do?
30. He did 30 years.
He just did 30 years. So we're gonna bring him back and give him an opportunity to talk about the program he started inside, and allow him to come on the show and give the information that's changing lives. Absolutely. You know, we got information that's changing lives. You know, and so tune in to our show. Look at what we're doing. We're doing things to help people. We got people coming home from prison in large numbers. We got women and men coming home every day. They're releasing lifers. They're coming back to the communities. So we're giving information to people and letting them know that you can do this. This is easy. You know, you got to come home and all the negative things about you going home and it's gonna be hard. No, this is elementary. This is elementary. All you got to do is come home and do it. The only person that can stop you is you. You say, come home, be part of this world, be part of society. Allah didn't make it to where you can go in the system and be it the rest of your life. That's not what you was designed for. You was designed to come back and be part of your community, clean your community up. We got problems in our communities. You know, the youngsters out of control. They killing people, don't know why they killing them. People dying, don't know why they dying. You see, so we got to come home and rectify what we started. We started this. You know, we left, went to prison for whatever crime we went to prison for. We started this. So we got to come back and make a wrong right, be part of our community. So we thank you for watching our show tonight. Look at our show Saturday night on channel 29 at 7 o'clock. You know, look at our show next Thursday on the 7th. We got a show coming on. We have the P.D. Perez story come on. The youngster was killed in Richmond, California. He's coming on next Thursday at 6:30. From 6:30 to 7, P.D. Perez family is going to come on and talk about the murder of their son. So stay tuned at 6:30 on Thursday the 7th, channel 76, and call in, give us some information, tell us how you feel about it. So thank you for watching the show. You can watch our show tonight on channel 29 at 7 o'clock. Thank you and have a good night.
Alhamdulillah.